get started, right?
Yep.
Okay. Rebecca, I can say. Good morning, thank you, and welcome to our June 26, 2023, 9 a.m. strategic planning meeting. Let the record reflect that we have all 5 commissioners present. Commissioner Jordan is on Zoom. We are going to go ahead and get started. We apologize for being a little late. We had a few technical difficulties. So we are going to go ahead and start with Randy Bischoff.
Hi, Kevin Ritchie's on Zoom also. We're here to talk about school resource officers. The next contract is coming up. They need to go out to all the schools and do the next annual contract. It costs for a mid-level deputy about $140,000 is the annual cost for those deputies. Last year, we recouped about 30% of that from the schools, and about 70% was paid for by the county. And so we're trying, between the sheriff's office and us, we're just, what do the commissioners want to support the schools at? Kevin said that the City of Airway Heights, who does the Cheney School District, they have 3 resource officers, but Cheney pays 100% of those officers. In 9 Mile Falls, we've done a 3-way split, third, where we paid $50,000 as commissioners. Stevens County paid $50,000, school district paid $50,000. You know, like I said, last year we paid about 70%, school districts paid 30%. Where do you want to be as we set this year's, as Kevin goes out, negotiates those contracts, where do you want to be so we know what those contracts should look like? I know last year you thought 30% was a little low.
Didn't we at one time, wasn't it a 50-50 split with us and the school district? For some reason, I want to think that some of our school districts, we were on a 50-50 basis.
I was always under the impression, when I first became a commissioner, I was under the impression that it was 50-50. It may not have been, but I know that's what I was told the split was.
Yeah, and I can say I knew it wasn't, because when I first became commissioner, it was right after the Freeman shooting. And that's when Kyle Rydell was at Liberty School District and Randy Russell is at Freeman, came to me. And so they were willing to, they were splitting the 30,000 between the two because they couldn't afford it. And so then they both figured out how to afford it. And it was like, I think it was only like 30 is my recollection.
And last year, Kevin, you can correct me, I think it was like $42,140 was the amount we charged last year.
Right. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm on vacation. I'm down in Calistoga, California, so I don't really have an office. So I'm just kind of right in front of a window here. But yeah, it's about 40. It's a little over $42,000, which is actually 50% of salary, but it doesn't capture any of the other costs. And so that's why I think the 50% number gets thrown around, because it is 50% of salary.
And some schools, okay. And then like with Central Valley, with the new high school, is Liberty Lake paying the full amount?
I don't know. Liberty Lake supplies a deputy for, I think it's called Ridgeline High School, and I don't know what they pay, to be honest with you.
Okay.
All of our contracts are consistent, even the Valley ones, where because they're dedicated resources to the Valley. But the contract is exactly the same thing. It's 41,000 or 42,000 and some change.
So I think it's have we had a discussion with the superintendent yet?
No, I was gonna. So I kind of wanted to have this conversation first, and then I was gonna set those up for mid-July. Generally, everyone right when the school year ends, they disappear until mid-July. And so I was going to start setting those up in mid to late July and start talking to them.
Well, and what you may try to do is the ESD, they do a superintendent's meeting at the ESD 101, is maybe try to meet there, just because then you can capture a lot of the superintendents at once. But I mean, I think one of the questions is, I know they're starting to, their ESSER funds are gone, from COVID relief dollars. So seeing are they getting additional funding for safety? With school shootings that have happened, and so I think it's worth having that conversation with them to find out what is happening. I guess one of the questions I had is, as Sheriff Knowles has talked about community policing, this is community policing just at a different level. And that you're getting information that is helping helping you all as well as it's providing that information to the schools. And I know as we've done the pilot project with West Valley School District, that having the resource officer too there to work with the clinicians as they've identified potential concerns from kids, that's been helpful as well. So what I don't want to do is have it be a separate police force like District 81 does, where the information's not getting out to then help the community as well. So I see it as a partnership between the two. What that level of dollar amount, I think, is, one of the things that, needs to have just a discussion at least to find out what their resources are.
Well, and I think you hit the nail on the head. We do have an emphasis on community policing. That's something that, Sheriff Knowles is going to emphasize over the next 4 years. And this is at the basic level, 100% community policing. I was an SRD about 13 years ago, and you are immersed in the schools and you become part of their administration, and you really have a lot of daily touch, a lot of daily interactions with the students and the faculty and everything. So it's a very valuable partnership that I don't think we want to go away for one, but I'm very sensitive, and I understand the impacts on the general fund and the dollars, but I think we need to really decide what we want to, what service we want to provide, and that's kind of what we're doing here. We're not. I call it a partnership. They're not buying service; it's a partnership, and so we just need to decide what we want to recapture. And bear in mind, some of the smaller school districts, like you mentioned, Freeman and Liberty, are not going to be able to afford much of an increase because they're already sharing the cost of one deputy. So, there's Meade and some other districts like that could probably pay 100%, and it wouldn't affect them too much. But the smaller districts are really they're the ones that are going to struggle.
I was thinking about Riverside was one of those school districts that really was challenged, and when we first started with them.
Yep.
And 9 Mile,
Yeah, well, 9 Mile, we got split 3 ways.
Right.
So we got some help there, but yeah, some of the other smaller districts.
But they're still only paying a third as the district.
But they're paying 50,000
Yes.
And-
versus
Yeah,
we're only
Yeah.
charging 42 to the others. So
Yeah.
so.
I don't know why, but I don't think, benefits and other indirect costs were really considered, or must not have been when we first started with these contracts, because it's really just a 50-50 split of salary.
So I think that's the question for the superintendents. Partly I'm concerned because their budget's already done for the next year. So,
Right.
we're then asking to have them adjust budgets, which they may not do. I don't know. So that's why it's got to be this conversation that starts, sooner, and may take a year to get to, so it can get into their budget. Because I'm hearing too that superintendents would like to have more resource officers in the schools. Not just at the high school, but even getting down to the junior high level. Like in East Valley. If they could be at the high school and then, junior high, just because there's just so much going on these days. And as you know, things are happening at younger ages, as we know. So.
I've heard the same thing from some of the districts up north. That
Yeah.
They would like additional.
And they might be willing to pay for those at a 100% rate. I don't know. So, I think those are the conversations we need to have. I don't know that you have the deputies to do it. That's going to be one of the other things.
We would have the myself and Lieutenant Gear and the 2 SRD sergeants would kind of start having those conversations with them. And you're right, we've been approached by districts to add. We probably would have already added a third to, I think it's Meade, but we just don't have anyone to give them right now. And so, but they wanted a third deputy, and they didn't give a number, but I think they were willing to pay for it. That's anecdotally. So.
Yeah, and go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna ask, so has the 50% of salary increased as we've had, it has increased with the increases in wages over time?
Yeah.
So it's tacked to that. It's not like it's been at 42,000 for 5 years or something. Okay.
And there's another component too. Last year, the districts approached us because they wanted deputies. They're more, instead they're on 410s right now, and they wanted them there 5 days a week. And one of the incentives they offered was a specialty pay, and so the districts for 10 months out of the year pay a 5% school resource specialty pay, and they pay 100% of that 5%. So.
Oh, yeah. And I think that's why, like I said, 30,000, because in fact, that was 2018.
Yeah.
End of 17, that's the amount that it was with Freeman and Liberty. They split the 30,000, 15 each.
So it's 42,000, but there's a 5%.
Part of that 42,000 is a 5%.
Is this extra little bump for, okay.
That's a
all right,
portion of the 42.
Okay.
Just a question, Kevin, if you were to look at the body of work that these school resource officers, these positions do over 12 months, what would you estimate the actual time that they spend focusing specifically on a school? So like in school session versus the summer session, do they then float back to do other duties in the county outside of school? Is it a 70-30, 80-20? What does that kind of look like? If you're just looking at it for that body of work.
Well, so they spend about 10 months in the school, and when they're in the school, it's 100%. They're dedicated to the school, and then in the summertime, I'm going to say 10 and 2 months but it's 2 months and a couple weeks or whatever, or a week and a half. But they roll back into patrol and they help with patrol staffing during those summer months, July and August. And most of or part of June, and then they lose that specialty pay as well when they roll back into patrol. So they do become part of staffing in summer.
So they're not 100% billable to the schools. They're
Right.
there too. Okay. I just think it's worth a conversation with the superintendents to see, if they're getting additional funds for security, how to, can they help participate a little bit more? Certainly be looking at the full benefit, package cost versus just the salary cost. I'm sure that was just Aussie when it was first set up, years ago.
I think this program was probably set up under Sheriff Skirk. I mean, it's been a long time. So.
Okay, so I think, as we all know, everyone's budgets are going to be looking cleaner. That we probably do need to look at, not just the salary, but the full package, and what would that look like? And again, what have they gotten additional funds, to help? But I think from a community policing standpoint, it's just been really having you guys there, and because I know the resource officers all meet on a regular basis to talk about what's going on in the different schools and all of that too, that's just something that's really important. So
I was just
Randy?
going to mention that while the county doesn't get a windfall by rising property values, the schools do, because their levies are based on a rate per thousand, not just a flat rate. So last year when property values went up 30%, they are receiving the benefit of that this year. Whereas we don't get any extra money for that. So that's another thing. They may have lost the ARP dollars, but they have these replacing that. So just keep that in mind as well.
When I get back into town, I will start the process of reaching out to them, and it's thank you for that. It's a good advice to attend the ESD meeting and kind of meet with them all at once. So I will look into doing that as well.
okay.
Is there a general direction the board would like Kevin to begin moving in? So today we're, I'm just quick math, we're 33%, 30%?
About 30% of 140, so to go 50-50, it'd be going to 70,000 would be like a 50-50.
So is the general desire that the board move, so they're 80% dedicated to schools today of the 10 out of 12 months. Is there a general desire to begin moving that to a 50-50 split, with the moving closer in future years? understanding what the budget impacts are, the timing of the school's budgets, just so Kevin has some fairly decent direction on kind of how to start guiding that conversation.
My thought is we need to, I would like to have the conversation with school districts, superintendents, just to see where they're at right now. Knowing we want to move to at least getting, 50% of the full, or instead of 50% of salary, 50% of the full cost of the resource officer, which I think that's at least a start. And then it starts the conversation that they might be able to handle that in their current budget as we renegotiate the contracts, and then start to look at what does that really mean, and kind of, I think really having their needs. I mean, because it's, I don't know, Kevin, is it, I mean, do you guys, when you guys work with the, out in the valley, when the resource officers all meet, does the Liberty Lake resource officer for Ridgeline, which is new, meet with you guys? Are those things happening so that way then everyone's really having those conversations across the board?
Yeah, yes, the Ridgeline deputy does come and participate in those meetings. He's part of their district, and it was Mark Holthouse for a long time. I'm not sure who it is now because he got promoted, but yeah, I would see him at those meetings all the time.
And then like at Cheney, does Cheney, their officers come to the meetings too?
Well, Cheney's unique because Airway Heights provides all three of the officers for the district. So yeah, they all meet together because they're from the same agency.
But they don't meet up with you guys when you're having discussions as to what's happening in other schools?
I don't know. Probably not. They should be, but yeah.
Yeah, I just see the value of everybody really coming together. So I'm just curious. Commissioner French and then Amber.
Yeah, so, I think philosophically, what the goal was is to try and get a 50-50 split with the school districts, and we've kind of moved away from that for whatever reason to where it was just salary, and I'd personally like to get back to that 50-50 split. If we can't do it in 1 year, do it in 2 years. But, Randy makes an excellent point. They experienced a windfall over this last couple of years because of the price of real estate, and I know all of us have received emails about property taxes skyrocketing, and we keep on reminding people, hey, yeah, but that wasn't us. That was the school districts and special purpose districts that got that windfall. But it would be nice if we could at least get back to a true 50-50 split that includes both soft and hard cost. So I agree with Commissioner Cooney.
Commissioner Waldron.
Yep, I'm in agreement. It may take a couple of years, but if we can have that conversation, they can start to build it into the budget. And I think having the conversation with ESD, at ESD 101 with some of the ESD 101 staff is also, because they've been applying and getting a lot of reducing risk and violence grants. And I know they're probably working closely with the resource officers to identify, potential when there might be a risk or of violence, or so there may be some other grant opportunities too that to coordinate with the SD 101. So just a thought.
Yeah, no, I think it'd be good. Okay. Commissioner Jordan, any thoughts? Oops. You're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, yes.
Nothing to add. I agree. 50-50 is a good place to start and a good goal to have.
Great. Okay, Kevin, any last thoughts?
Nope. I have my orders, and I will let you know what I find out here probably in a couple months.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin.
And enjoy your time. Thank you for zooming in. Okay.
Not a problem.
Okay, thank you, Randy. Okay, that's gonna take us to Scott Chesney. And Jessica Milburn.
Good morning, Commissioners. We have for you today another one of our ongoing discussions related to our comprehensive plan and some details that are coming together in moving that forward. Next slide, please, Rob. As you know, we're updating the plan for 26. Target statutorily is the end of June. We will be hopefully on your agenda on the 25th. And this is an attempt to do two things. One is to update an existing plan that still has value, but also to take a fresh look, kind of another layer, take a fresh look at growth and development. What are going to be some of the priorities? What has changed in that last period of time? And look at frankly how the county grows in partnership with all of our cities, rather than kind of the disjointed planning past that we've all been a part of in our backgrounds. Next slide, please. What we have done so far is many of these things you have been a part of. You can see the top two on there, the settlement agreement work and the capital facilities plan. Those are truly our critical path efforts for the remainder of 23 in our internal sense, not in our partnership sense with our steering committee. As you know, those must be done to move any of the rest of this forward and to move ourselves back into compliance. The preliminary evaluation impacts, that's really looking at we're taking a look now at what is the cumulative impact of the better part of 7 or 8 years of comprehensive plan amendments and other things that were, in a sense, unanticipated land use changes from the comp plan. And that can be something that like a golf course that was presumed to be a golf course or non-development space in perpetuity and now turning into 400 residential lots. So we're looking at those evaluations to wrap that up. And then you were part of the countywide planning policies being updated, as well as the public participation program guidelines. Next slide, please. So as we move forward, we've laid this out in a year-by-year fashion to put down the major elements of this. And most noteworthy, on the bottom, you'll see that progress arrow that has public engagement and partner engagement. Those are continuous. As you noted, or as we noted in the public participation guidelines, those are going to be ongoing efforts to involve our public in new and innovative ways. So that's just, you'll see that on as we go. The top one here, philosophy and visioning, is something we're going to start with you and the Planning Commission very quickly as we get moving. And that's going to be talking about, in a sense, what we call placemaking. An awful lot of comprehensive plan amendments and platting is on almost a linear basis. It's a piece of land, it gets platted, it goes forward. Some of those really aren't connected to building a sense of place, or in another way of thinking of it, creating neighborhoods. Just like a city, every great place is a collection of great neighborhoods. And so trying to shift ourselves into making these as neighborhoods, we believe will add value to the development, it will add value to the county. It's very much in sync with capital facilities planning and others, because if you're looking at creating neighborhoods, now you're talking about adding markets, open spaces, and these other amenities that are there instead of simply land use patterns going on as they move forward. Now, a couple of things that also jump out, starting with the 23 plan. The third bullet, especially joint planning. Jessica and I have met with the city, their planning director and legal counsel, to talk over what that joint planning might look like. And that's something that we definitely want to talk to you about in more detail today. And I don't know if we want to do it right in the middle of this or go through this and come back to it. But we want to talk about what the expectations of the cities are going, the expectations we will have of the cities, including how growth is at least established, the initial analysis of the urban growth areas, and then what elements should be part of interlocal agreements for joint planning. And so I'll come back to that. And noting on here the development patterns and the inventory. Key thing, you may have seen it, the OFM population numbers came out a week or so ago, or at least the preliminary ones. The final ones are due really any day now, the end of the month. And the area or the place with the largest number of growth or from 2020 to 2023 is unincorporated Spokane County, followed by the city of the Valley and then the city of Spokane. So in terms of raw numbers, more people grew into the unincorporated county than the other places as well. And that in a way, it keeps pointing to needing a better understanding of joint planning, a better understanding of how we're using our UGAs and what those impacts are for the county and the cities going forward. The UGA analysis portion of this has been underway with the PTAC. They've been working on the methodology. That will be coming to the steering committee July 19th for your comments and recommendations there. Our goal is to have the steering committee make a recommendation and keep this moving. It's been very easy in the past for these to be studied until they fall over and die. But we've been fairly successful at pushing it through the PTAC so far to keep this thing on track. And we're hoping the steering committee will feel the same way. And then just as a point of information, we have received a number, maybe 24 or more, what we're calling letters of interest from property owners and representatives about wanting to be included in a future urban growth area. So there is lots of interest, not surprisingly, and that will all be factored into the UGA process. Notably, because of those letters of interest, that's one way of looking at this, but we're not anticipating a formal application process, rather pushing this back to the cities to say, as we go through this capacity analysis, how have you grown? What do you have left? How do you anticipate moving that forward? And then tell us where you think you need growth areas outside of your current municipal boundary or outside of the current UGA that is contiguous with that boundary. Giving those cities a chance and frankly the responsibility to do that in their own capital facilities planning to justify that. Then that comes back to us and the steering committee for consideration and a recommendation. And as you know, ultimately this board will allocate what that urban growth boundary looks like. Yes, sir.
So that's what we did last time, and it burned us really bad because the city came in and overestimated what they could accomplish in that 20-year period. They never came anywhere close to their goal.
Correct.
But because they consumed so much capacity, it took away from other jurisdictions and the county. And so I'm a little concerned when I hear that we're going to go back to the city and repeat what we did 20 years ago, 10 years ago, and set ourselves up for them just taking away capacity that they'll never build out. And then we're stuck again with a lack of housing that impacts our ability to drive an economy, to attract new jobs and stuff. So help me get comfortable with the idea that we're going to go back out to the cities and ask them, what can you do? And how do we hold them accountable to whatever number it is that they give us?
So I'll take a part of that. So the Growth Management Act and the attendant WACs actually do set forth that the way that the process works is that each city recommends an urban growth area for what's called its municipal urban growth area. But there are also unassociated UGAs. So, and as a part of that process, the city goes out and says, here's how we want to grow. And the idea is, under the Growth Management Act, that the municipal UGAs that they assign are future annexation areas. But ultimately, the county, as the regional planning government, basically is the arbiter of where growth happens. So the city comes in and says, here's how we see we're going to grow. And then they also are supposed to provide a capital facilities plan. It's really not supposed to, even though we, the county, have the ultimate responsibility of demonstrating the CFP for the UGAs, that's really supposed to be part of the city function. How will they support their municipal urban growth area? And then once they have that and they have their analysis on basically their buildable lands, then they come back to the county. We have all of the city information. We have all of the unassociated UGA areas, and we have, in addition, past performance, like you mentioned, Commissioner French, that we can take into consideration. And if the county decides to alter the proposed UGAs, we're allowed to do that. We just have to justify why. And so part of that analysis could be, City of Spokane, we see, what you're saying, but given past practice or given our analysis that we've done independently, we feel like you're not growing as fast as maybe the City of the Valley or the North Metro area, which the City of Spokane has indicated they really don't want to be associated with because it's not their service area. So maybe that area is growing more, and the county makes adjustments and then just justifies those. So we still have ultimate control, basically.
What the city did last time was that they said, we can absorb so much population. In fact, in 2001, I think the number was like 52,000. And then they cut it back, and then they cut it back again. But what they did is, instead of expanding the urban growth boundary, they said, we're going to adopt centers and corridors, and we're going to adopt infill development regulations, which they still don't have 22 years later. And that's how they consumed the capacity. And so they didn't expand the boundary. They consumed capacity, didn't adopt the ordinance to fulfill that, and then we end up with a housing crisis. What I'm trying to do is avoid that from happening again. And I do know that in some of the other counties, they've not only said you can, they said you will accommodate this much growth in your jurisdiction, figure it out and stuff. So I guess I apologize for being passionate about this. I mean, I've been at this now for 25 years, and I've seen this system get gamed time and time again. And the ones that end up paying the price are citizens with inflationary costs with housing, because we don't have enough land to accommodate the housing, and we don't have the policies to be able to do it on an infill basis. So I'm just I'm the canary in the mine here, saying, let's don't do this again to ourselves.
We did meet with Commerce on this also to ask how could we compel them to take on more, population. And so that is something that we broached with them. I don't think they had any great answers, but we are investigating that and our options. And so it'll probably be evolving, and I'm certain that it'll be, before this board a lot.
Well, let me say, I am as aware of this as you are.
No, I'm preaching to the choir.
And
This is where you say hallelujah.
one of the strategies, one of the processes we've taken with the steering committee and with our professional colleagues and with the cities is to reestablish the county as a planning partner, not as a planning adversary from the last time. And it's been successful. We got the countywide planning policies updated. We're moving forward with this methodology that everybody's agreeing to. And from the very beginning, we have told the cities and towns, here's how the UGA process is going to work. You will have to show your work to justify what you say you can do. And we will be looking at past performance. We have some data. The cities have been somewhat reluctant to provide us data on, say, building permits over the last 20 years. So we've worked with SRTC that accumulates that same building data from all the cities, and they've produced a diagram that shows the permits throughout the county. And we've just limited it to the last 5 or 6 years, just because it otherwise becomes a scattershot diagram. But what you can see is two things that are reasonably startling. In fact, our planning commissioners, a couple of the new ones, were almost lost their breath when they saw this go up on the screen, is the enormous amount of residential permitting done in the unincorporated county outside of the UGAs. It is massive. There are thousands of permits over that period of time that people just don't think about because they're always focused inside the UGAs. But also, when you look at the two big cities, the City of the Valley and the City of Spokane, what you see is a very evenly dispersed pattern of permits. A little bit of a concentration in East Central along the freeway, certainly the big concentration in Kendall Yards because it's new, but otherwise it's a fairly uniform distribution of permits. So among other things, what that says is you can't look at that diagram and go, there's a center, there's a corridor, here's where this development is happening, because it didn't happen. It just didn't happen over that period of time. And so we do know that the city, especially the city council currently, is very interested in infill. They have changed their regulations. They have done some things in housing that are really aggressive and have gotten noteworthy attention in the planning profession nationwide. But there's no there's no backing to say that that can actually happen right now. It's an aspirational goal. And for our next growth pattern of 20 years, we have to look realistically at where we are going to grow. And so that past performance will be something that we will bring to the steering committee. The steering committee will acknowledge it, and they will have to make a recommendation and say, yeah, that was a really good idea, but it didn't work very well, and we're gonna go with this pattern, and that will come back to you for a different perspective than you probably saw in 2016. You know, and that's our key thing here is moving this forward in that partnership basis. It's like, we're not criticizing, we're just saying, here's the reality. These are where the permits have gone over this period of time. What assurance can you give the steering committee now that this is going to be any different in the next 5 to 10 years?
So one of the challenges with the approach that the city of Spokane has taken is that they've allowed for increased density, but their infrastructure does not support that, and sewer and water specifically. And then when you've got, you know, a 1-inch water line coming into a piece of property and it's going to try and serve 3 parcels instead of 1, doesn't work and stuff. So now they've got a significant reinvestment into infrastructure. The city's already screaming that they don't have the capacity to develop the pump system to pump enough water, much less the pipe capacity to transfer it. So, I mean, it's one thing to say you can, but it's a whole nother thing to actually implement that and say, okay, here's a path forward. And I know this because I've talked to a number of developers that have tried to go in and work with the city on increasing density on lots. And, you know, there's so many hurdles that, you know, what I'm being told is the only time you can actually effectively do it is on a corner lot. Well, if you got a standard block that's got 12 units on a face of a street, and you only got 2 out of those 12 that are actually can be converted into higher density, and it's because they face on 2 streets and get access to utilities. I just don't want to be deceived into believing that we can achieve numbers that just from a practical standpoint are not there. And from a historical standpoint, there isn't the courage to be able to say, we're going to develop the regulations necessary to implement this. So I did have a conversation last week with the new director of commerce, and he is going to come out here in a couple of weeks, and we're going to have a conversation and a tour. Awesome. Yeah, okay, thank you.
And Jessica hinted at the other tool we have to evaluate their work, and that's capital facilities planning. As we have learned painfully over the last 2 years, the CFP process that we've all used in the past was not the one we were supposed to be using to match our growth with our capital facilities. Now that we've aligned and synced those two up, and we had a brief conversation with this at one of the early steering committee meetings in 21, when the Valley was making the comment of wanting essentially more land. You know, the very, very easy analysis, we need more land, we're running out. And we were saying, one of the analyses is, if you can show us you can afford it, if you can show us the infrastructure's there or you can afford to do that, that's going to be one of the key hurdles of moving a project forward. And you hit that square on the head, Commissioner, for infill development. Infill development in older cities was planned at 4 units an acre or 5 units an acre, and the pipes and everything were sized accordingly. To try to double that and say you can push twice the water through the same pipe doesn't work very well. And you can do it in limited circumstances where you can either open streets quickly or you've got some capacity, but it's a lot harder to do than you think. And you know, every city has its own limitations. Spokane, because of its age, probably has more, just in the sense that the infrastructure that was put in as the city was growing is old and small. And it's very different than probably the infrastructure in the Valley or the infrastructure in Liberty Lake. And so those constraints have to be addressed when anybody says, yep, we can put 20,000 new residents into these 3 centers. It's like, well, can you? Do you have the infrastructure? Can you show us that you can do that? So it's intent as well.
That'll be part of the process, though.
Yeah.
The city will have to do their own capital facility
Correct.
analysis.
Correct. And so it's not us criticizing their policy, it's saying, show us your policies work and your regs work.
One last thing, I'm hoping that in your analysis, you're also looking at deed restrictions and covenants, CC&Rs, because a lot of the development since the 1960s have got covenants and deed restrictions about the nature of use of that property. Single-family residential property is what it's been restricted to. So it doesn't matter what's on the books from a zoning standpoint, you can't violate those deed restrictions and stuff. So that means the only neighborhoods that are eligible for this increased density are the older neighborhoods. And it's a forced regentrification of the older neighborhoods if in fact the city's going to achieve what they say they're going to achieve.
Right. And that sort of infill development is still healthy. That's good development, because if you can make it work, you are using existing infrastructure, you're staying closer to schools and shopping. So everything in here is to encourage infill development, but it also has to be real. It can't be an excuse to prevent other development.
Yeah.
And so that's the biggest difference from 2016. Okay, because we've got a better track record of proving whether it's going to be real.
Okay, thank you.
Next slide, please. These are just a few of the collaborative issues that we're working on, and they're, I wouldn't call them rocket science, but in some cases they're somewhat innovative for comprehensive regional planning. The interdisciplinary, what we're calling interdisciplinary partnerships. We have a lot of staff here at Spokane County that touch elements of things that belong in a comprehensive plan. Kyle's staff in transportation is one of the obvious examples that we can use some of their expertise and their time to augment our own planning staff. Randy and Tessa on the budget side have been invaluable because we have to link this CFP back to everything we do. Doug and the park staff are another obvious one, and of course you can see the others, SRTC, which is by nature countywide. And we're going to be reaching out to the Conservation Service, the other ag-based related industries, because we focus so much on growth in our urban growth areas, we've sometimes just assumed or taken for granted our ag designations, and we need to make sure that we're preserving those, because much as we talked about heavy industry a year ago, once ag lands are gone, they're gone. And so that's such an important part of our economy. Adding layers of protection to that for planning are very useful. So we've got those, like I said, and then a couple other things. We've talked with our CEO about getting our directors together, maybe quarterly. Again, not all departments realize that they connect to the comprehensive plan, and sometimes departments have virtually no real connection. But knowing what's there, that it is a comprehensive plan for the county and not just a land use and permitting tool, helps bring all of us together as county leaders to say, yeah, this is how we're going to grow, and this is how we're going to make that happen. And then we think one of the key elements is working with our peer counties. Obviously, since we're all subject to the Growth Management Act and the WACs, the more we can learn about how others are doing things creatively, the more we can see here's our regulatory guardrails. Can we go outside of that? Can we not go outside of that? And if nothing else, as we learned at the last legislature, if we partner up with our counties, much as WASAC is always trying to do, we got that little bit of relief through the legislature by partnering with King County. That wouldn't have happened without that. And so building those relationships in the comp plan side, I think also gives us and you, the commissioners, more strategic partners as we go forward with legislative activity. Next slide, please. In 24, all this preliminary stuff is geared up and we're really moving. And here, the first thing we're going to really push will be what we call the priorities for growth. And that's where we'll be working through the end of this year and the first part of next year, both with you, our planning commission, and the steering committee, through that visioning process, through some scenario building exercises to talk about what are those priorities, as you might imagine. That will be very informative in ultimately describing what an urban growth area boundary looks like, because it'll be tied not just to individual cities' growth needs, but what are going to be the priorities of the bigger regional government in terms of growth. So those are going to be big issues here. And you can see here, we'll be confirming that capacity analysis and then creating that the initial UGA projections. That will happen, in mid-24. And then we'll move on to, as you might imagine, in addition to those bigger things, we will be looking at all of the mandated elements of the comprehensive plan by GMA and starting to go through them chapter by chapter by chapter. Some of it has this broader visioning perspective, and some of it's fairly pedestrian that you just have to update certain elements of it. Next slide, please, Ron. In 25, we're rolling up our sleeves and grinding away. All these simply get pushed forward in more detail. The final UGA will come into shape probably mid-year here. And then as you can see here, all the elements into an initial plan. Next slide, please. And then in the, at least the first parts of 26, it's refining and coordinating, getting things out, getting it out through all of the planning partners, making sure everybody's ready to shake hands and move things forward. Next slide, please. And then in here is I realize the slide is a little hard to see. What we did for you, again, we appreciate this board's support to allocate funds to add planners to our long-range planning team. And for the moment, we've labeled them Dr. Seuss style over on the left, A through F. Put a hat on each of them. They'll get a letter with a hat on it, like a high school football team. And what we're going to do with them, we believe it will be useful to specialize in many cases, so that, for example, the two at the bottom, E and F, are really going to be focusing on the climate change element and the housing element as this year rolls along. If we try to do too many interdisciplinary things, we lose the focus and can sometimes lose track of critical elements. So we're going to specialize in key elements and then be able to work across the platform in others. But you can see 23 activities fairly straightforward, what we've gone through. 24 and 25 kind of lumped together because they simply flow together. And then in 26 is not only pulling it all into a plan for your consideration ultimately, but also we have to update development regulations to be consistent with this new plan at the time that it's adopted. We've also talked about using that as the starting point for a unified development code, much like the city has. That'll be a 27 into 28 activity probably, because it'll be fairly extensive. But this is a quick roadmap on how we're going to lay out our human resources to attack these elements. And last slide, please, Ron.
So C, D, E, and F would be the 4 new planners.
Correct.
And so where are we at in that process in the second half of this year?
The positions, thanks to Ashley and her team, were posted last week. We have 24 applicants already. 3 of them are recent grad students from Eastern, and we've been in touch with their program director or dean, who is serving as our advanced person, trying to say, this is a really good opportunity to his top students, and you should take advantage of this. So we would anticipate, we're right on track to middle of July, probably have some offers out. Since we're anticipating we're targeting recent grads, not existing planners. There's no notices to give, they can start almost immediately. So we think we'll over that, and obviously there's a ramp up in training period, but we think that we'll be able to get started and be really productive with this in the last half of the year.
So how many people do we have on staff right now in the planning department?
Total? 11, 12? I think 12 plus support staff.
And then adding these additional.
Right.
four
We have
people?
two planners currently assigned to the long range system. All of the rest are in current planning and land use processing plats.
Okay.
2 in code enforcement.
And 2 in code enforcement, yes.
Part of the planning team.
Our weak spot was really long-range planning.
Yeah, that's what these are all targeted towards, right,
Yes.
Scott, all long range.
Oh, I was just gonna ask, so when you presented kind of a draft budget, we looked it over and we put, we've put aside some of the ARPA funds to, get these folks hired and off the ground, and then you're expecting more dollars next year coming from Commerce, right? That budget really hasn't, in that budget, you had looked at some consultants maybe around these specialty areas of the affordable housing chapter and the climate change chapter. Have you been in touch with other counties that are now having to start that work? Are we gonna be able to piggyback on other counties that are maybe a year ahead of us?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Because those are new chapters, not really anyone has worked on those yet.
Yes, and they are complicated beyond traditional planning because they're forcing income-based allocations that have to go out. It's a very impractical thing to do. So figuring out how to actually do this is going to be really challenging because it's really unrealistic to think the county can simply say to Deer Park, here, there's 400 low-income housing units that you have to accommodate. We don't care what the market looks like in Deer Park. It's like, this is what you're going to do. We've got to figure out how to make that work in a way that actually gets done, that the market can respond to and invest in.
Is there a way to ask the cities when they're doing their, looking at their own growth, to look at affordable housing within their context? And I mean, is that gonna be, that would be the easiest way to go about it, have them come and bring it back, and then if it's not meeting the needs, then we have to have more conversation.
Exactly. That'll be part of their mandate to look at their growth, is to accommodate all of these parameters, not just the traditional natural growth and
Because
migration.
that gets to what you were bringing up, Commissioner French, around like gentrification in older neighborhoods. How are you gonna make sure you have, as more high-end units maybe get developed, how are you gonna ensure you still have enough units for lower income individuals and families? So, I mean, that'll be a good exercise. I just am wondering, are those the two chapters that you're thinking we'll need to bring in some outside consultants too, just to help with running numbers and?
Those are the two obvious ones. We will probably look to some assistance on the upfront, bigger picture visioning side of the process as well. The consultant role, well, put it this way, because we're investing in permanent staff to learn these things and be advocates for the county as they build a career, we want to use consultants as subject matter experts to fill in those gaps that would take decades to accumulate by yourself, and we can buy that service more effectively.
So do you think the budget that we've been able to put aside with the ARPA funds plus what comes from the state, I know it was a little bit less than what you had proposed.
I don't know what the final budget came out. The proposed budget, we were very comfortable that we could accommodate everything we need. But frankly, if there's a different budget, we'll work with it. And there are other grant opportunities that we've already been looking at. So we're taking a look at what other funds we can accumulate to do this kind of planning, both state and sometimes federal funds. And something that is kind of non-traditional for public planning, but we used to do for our clients on the private side, is there are community and professional and other family foundations that fund these things. They don't always like funding governments themselves, but sometimes for a role like this, they will. It's a funding source that you can look at that's really non-traditional for urban planning. So we know there are other places to look for funds. We believe that there's been some discussion that for some of the other specialty requests that came out of the legislature, there may be some additional funding that we haven't identified beyond the climate and the general planning grant. The general planning grant we know is as certain as anything. It's posted. We know how to get that funds. The climate funds were announced, but I haven't seen anything specific about how to go take that money out of the bank yet. So we'll be monitoring that carefully, but we'll also be looking for other sources of funding moving forward. Last slide, please, Ron.
Commissioner French, go ahead.
Well, when you're done with this, I've got one last thought, so.
And this is just to, show the bright star at the end. And two things, of course, here. One is, as we were putting this together, someone didn't know how to spell plan refinement. And so that looks a little funny up there. But, trust us with your community anyway. And the other, obviously the date, we've been using June 30th as a statutory date. We would be looking at June 25th, which would be your Tuesday closest to that as our push it across the finish line day. So that's our roadmap and how we plan to at least initially lay out our staff and resources to work through this. And then I know Commissioner French, you have something, and then I guess Jessica and I wanted to make sure we got back to that joint planning discussion on some of those elements that you would feel important to put into interlocal agreements.
Go ahead, I've got a couple of questions too.
So, as it relates to housing, I know that initially our goal was to have the STAR closer to 23 than 26, because we've got a housing crisis now. And I know that you and I have talked about this before, but I guess I just want to put it on the table for the other commissioners to contemplate, is we need to be able to get more land available for housing. And one of the things the county commissioners did before I got here was that they did a zone change to allow for residential development in light industrial areas. And not realizing that that had an impact on the airports. And so they immediately issued a moratorium and they rescinded and got rid of housing in light industrial area. But they did it as a blanket policy across the whole county. Since then, the airports and Fairchild have developed impact areas. So we now have formalized impact areas around Phelps, SIA, and Fairchild. And so we know where those areas are that are sensitive to the airports, but there's a lot of light industrial area that still lies outside of that boundary that we could put into place a zone change that would say you can allow for residential development in light industrial areas outside of the impact areas for the airport, and that would get us land available for residential construction before 2026. And it would allow us to be able to start taking some of this land that is zoned light industrial that is not going to move because we over zoned light industrial in some areas because we had no other idea what we're going to do, quite frankly. But that would allow those areas to become residential. And so I would like to have the board formally consider having planning staff and planning commission come back with the recommendation to do a zone change that would allow for residential development in light industrial zones outside of the impact areas for the airports, so that we can at least start to address the housing shortage long before the summer of 26, because this is becoming critical for us. So I just want to put that on the table for your consideration. And I don't know that Mr. Chesney is opposed to that, other than, just going through the process.
If we can identify tools that can go in concert with this update that look like they would be consistent with the future update, we would certainly be able to support that and move it forward.
So I guess I just would have some more questions that I just need to, because I don't know, so what that specifically the West Plains, but how does that affect the valley? My area, I know I had some conversations with Doug Yost, because I think they've got some light industrial that they'd like to switch. So I'd like to have a couple conversations to
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
see what impacts that would have.
Certainly, as you know now, that would have to be done through a comp plan amendment, and we can't do those while we're in the midst of this, but a zone change is a separate issue.
So, and I guess that's one of my questions is with the comp plan amendments that, you know, so I had a conversation with a gentleman from the gun club, you know, that has been trying to, that Central Valley School District sold their property. You know, then they had the whole issue out on the West Plains, the property they developed. They're looking at some other property. But they can't wait till 2026 for that. So how are we handling, I mean, there's, you know, because you've got 1031 exchanges or 39, I can't remember.
1031s.
You know, that are occurring, that is like, if we have to stop everything for 3 years, I mean, we're stopping those things that are costing, you know, money and development opportunities and all of that. And so I guess that's part of my concern is that I feel like we have staff that is should be able to do part of those pieces and then you know, not just do a moratorium until 2026, because I mean, like with the gun club, I mean, I think they've already potentially lost their 1031 exchange. They've lost a lot of money based on what happened out on the West Plains. You know, they're doing their due diligence on this other property, that if they don't have some certainty that they can get the conditional use permit, then you know, they're lost. And they were really told that people were going to be working with them on this. So
Got it. In some cases, as you mentioned, a conditional use permit is, yes, it exists in our shop, but it's a totally separate animal from the comprehensive planning it's done by our current planning staff, goes through the hearing examiner process, doesn't go through the PC or back to you. So those would proceed normally. There'd be no slowing down anything that needs a conditional use permit. In terms of comprehensive plan amendments, yeah, we asked you for permission to pull back on that because we could see this workload coming ahead of us, and we were not ready to be able to do all of those things. What I can, what I can cautiously say optimistically is with the ability to bring on 4 planners, get them up to speed, if we can do that effectively, we can probably find capacity to work on a comprehensive plan. And I would say very carefully, because the challenge, it's one thing to do a zoning change that allows for multifamily in a light industrial zone. Those are pretty well established. They're probably not going to change a lot in the comprehensive plan process. It's another to say, you want to bring on all sorts of other changes while you're in the midst of examining your entire plan. And so what I would say is if we can do things strategically and that look like they would be in conformance or supported by the overall plan analysis, and it's a matter of doing them ahead of time, we could take a look at bringing that back to you for consideration.
because I guess that's part of what I'm thinking is when we do these comp plan amendments, we're looking at how it fits into what the overall plan is and what we think the future plan is. My understanding, we weren't just willy-nilly approving comprehensive plan, amendments, that was part of the whole process. I mean, so I guess that's where I'm just concerned that, telling people we're putting a moratorium for the next 3 years is potentially, damaging to the economy and to our housing stock. So I guess that was part of my hope with, by asking, employee numbers and all of that, is that, I still feel like there's a job that's being done and we have additional work that needs to be done for this, and we're provided the funding for that, so we can hopefully continue on our other path.
That's the distinction from when we asked before to say, we need to focus on the 26 plan and not do these amendments because we just don't have the capacity. If we can ramp ourselves up, we can create some capacity to do that. And if we're talking about plan amendments that are still within the existing urban growth area, for example, still perhaps simply changing light industrial to residential or residential from a low to a medium or high density, those are likely not inconsistent with the thinking that we'll be doing overall. And we would have no problem putting those into a formula that says this is still satisfies the basic tenets of the Growth Management Act while we're doing this. But we would want to be careful about that we don't change something now that we really come back in 25 and go, well, we should have done it. We should have put something else on that, different color on that lamp. So we're open to that consideration. Looking forward, the goal of this comprehensive plan as something that's not just an update, but is that fresh look, is to say, how can the plan help growth over, maybe in these 10-year intervals where you have to do the updates, or the 5-year update rather, where you can have some by right changes that reflect market changes. So if the market continues to push housing, there's a by right change that says you can move where you could, in other words, you can create a residential category that isn't limited to single family, medium or high density. It's like it's residential, and it will be planned and built and reflected to the market and reflected to design and development standards that help fit into the neighborhood or urban design standards around it. You and I have talked about the whole neighborhood character issue of higher density plats, 4,000 foot plats dropping in next to half-acre and 1-acre lots. Having those urban design standards, if you've got the flexibility to change the density, but you've got the design standards to talk about integrating and filling in, you can ameliorate a lot of the tension and issues. That's what we would anticipate coming out of the 26 plan, is a way to grow that without having to go through individual comp plan amendments all the time. But we're not there yet. So
No, and that's certainly one of those, and my district is probably one that has that highest issue where it's been, the valley area's been 1-acre plots or 2 or 3-acre lots over the years that had happened before growth management came in. And then suddenly to have these little small farms get bought up and have super high density to people that have 1-acre lots. I mean, it's, they have property rights too, and suddenly it's like we're all just, I see it, probably up north, you see it as well, but it's really becoming a real issue in the valley. As we've been trying to, because that was more those 1-acre lots. So West Plains was a little more wide open, South County a little more wide open, but I mean, we're really seeing that in the valley where it's a huge issue. And I think up north, as well as some of these small little farms, are getting sold, and we allowed for the eight homes per acre because we needed the housing, but that doesn't mean that that's should be going right into the back of somebody
Right.
else's, planned neighborhood that is all 1-acre lots.
and we've certainly seen that, since I've been here. And, I reflect back on, the experience that if you have design and development standards that talk about not just architecture and character of building, but how it meets the street and the public realm and how it deals with integrating into a neighborhood, even though it doesn't sound like infill development because it's on the edge of a community, but it's part of a built-up area. If you've got those standards in place, most developers, most designers look at that and go, the easiest way to get a permit is to do that. If I want to fight about it, I can fight about it, but it's going to take me longer and it's going to cost me money. If you give me clear direction, I'll find a way to pencil that out. But we don't have that yet.
Well, and my first day in 2017, my first meeting was a lady really upset because they had 1-acre lots in this development, and somebody bought an empty lot, and the homeowners group didn't really exist anymore, and so they put, at that time, 6 homes on that 1 acre on cul-de-sac.
Yeah.
And that's what that's what's not, fair. So I really want to make sure that as we look at this, we're paying attention to that.
Absolutely.
For the neighborhood, because, I understand we need housing, but we also shouldn't do that.
Growth, but there's protection of what's already been invested.
And then in the valley, we're just seeing, the apartment buildings go up, which isn't providing home ownership and allowing for equity development, which helps the future economy and doesn't provide that security of knowing what your mortgage is going to be versus an apartment rent that keeps increasing. And so
The city of the Valley has struggled with that. The city of Spokane has struggled with that. Even probably 2 years ago now, a project that was proposed for multifamily housing on the South Hill off of Regal, already zoned for multifamily, and the city council turned down the permit.
Yeah.
And as far as I know, amazingly, they didn't get sued, but they turned it down because they thought it was too much development in that area. And that's been kind of a history of what's happened here. We get a lot of multifamily built on the edges because it's easier to find a piece of land and do it out there than it is to do infill development where the multifamily might be able to pay for the new utilities, or it might be closer to transit, it might be something where people didn't have to buy a car to live in that apartment. So we've got sort of those mixes in place. We can't put that genie back in the bottle, but we can talk about how you infill around it that makes a little more sense. So but anyway, we're very aware of that balance between protecting what's there and still promoting new growth.
Well, and the light industrial areas are all already in the urban growth boundary, and so most of them. But the challenge is, if we can't take underutilized land that's already in the UGA because it's own light industrial, and we're forcing, like you said, more development outside of the UGA on larger lots, now we're increasing our demand on our transportation system. We're stressing our infrastructure, and we still have vacant land inside the UGA that's not developing. And so if we can do a zone change that allows for that land to be developed for light industrial, for residential, we start to address the issue that Commissioner Cooney raised in terms of home ownership as opposed to multifamily. I don't have a big issue with multifamily other than, it deprives you of home ownership. And the legislature, in their infinite wisdom, just allowed condo development up to 12 units. Now developers are trying to figure out how to parcel out their land, so they just do 12 units that looks like a major apartment building complex. Just nonsense. But anyway, it just seems like that's a short lift, gets us an easy solution, it gets us an opportunity to develop residential development inside the UGA today, as opposed to waiting until 2026, 3 years out, when that development will happen outside of the UGA or it happen over in Cooney County.
We do have
So,
one.
So I've got Commissioner Jordan, and then we're running way
Yeah.
over time, and we've got a hard stop that we need for 10:45. So Commissioner Jordan?
Thank you. And I just want to make sure that we did get to the question about joint planning. That's something I'm interested in. It's been mentioned in our previous conversations. And I just want to say I appreciate all the work. There's a lot to do. And Director Chesney, your statement that we need to reestablish the county as a planning partner. And I think that's going to be critical to this going forward. But was just curious where we're at with joint planning efforts, if there have been any specific commitments from those who we may be planning with.
Yes. Well, I guess the specific commitment is to talk more about what specific commitments we need to do. We're at that early stage of agreeing to go forward and do that. What has been identified, though, are some elements, and Jessica's been instrumental in laying these out. But what kinds of things we want to consider in an interlocal agreement? Is it something as specific as being able to adopt or infer that tax increment financing can be used for commercial development, for example, or annexation agreements? How do we say we're going to do joint planning without or with some sort of an annexation agreement that says somewhere over time the city makes a commitment that you will take this because the county is not here to provide urban services forever. And that's especially true if the city wants to have that developed at their municipal standards, road infrastructure, public services. We can do that, but this county is not prepared to maintain those urban services at a county level for the 40 or 50 years that they're going to be in existence. That's why we have different standards. And so there's a commitment to say, well, then should there be a revenue sharing? Should the city and county have a revenue sharing approach during the time that this is not yet being annexed in? and what that annexation agreement really looks like is way of, the old, Wild West style of, oh, let's go grab the Costco and draw a nicely neat line around it and leave all the residential out of the unincorporated county. That's not a good partnership at all. And yet the residential parts are what the cities really don't want, because under their current model, they don't cover the cost of providing urban services. So figuring out what that model looks like, where the county is growing in ways that support the revenue needed to provide those services and provide county services, as opposed, and in addition to some commitment from cities that says, yeah, these urban growth areas are going to be yours and you need to agree to that over a 10-year span, because that's your responsibility. With the city of Spokane, part of that is easier because they are a water and sewer provider for a great deal of that retail service area. The city of the Valley is dependent on 12 water districts and 4 fire districts or so. They all touch that, and so those are different annexation equations than they are with the city itself. All of which are solvable, but some of which we just really haven't thought very much about. But that's kind of the guts of the joint planning arrangement.
So the question is, before this board, is we can do a lot of things with an interlocal agreement, and we're starting with the city of Spokane, but what we want to do is whatever we develop with the city of Spokane would basically be a template that we would work with the city of Spokane Valley and everyone else. So the main questions are, for joint planning, what are some things the board would like in a joint planning agreement? Some of the options are, whose development regulations do we apply? Do we apply the cities for their municipal UGA? Do we apply only ours? Do we apply a hybrid? Does that come with strings in something like an annexation agreement, where it's like, okay, city, we'll apply your regs, you agree to phase in, annex at these intervals, and as a part of that, this is the area you agree to annex, so that we can control a balance between commercial and residential, and then also have a cost sharing agreement with that. So those are some of the options we want to feel out. What are the board's kind of hard lines? What are some things that you're interested in? Also, the city of Spokane's provided us with their just a proposed ILA, and so it has kind of everything that they want in it, which also includes things like impact fee areas for their JPA, for a UGA, especially for things like water. And then other things we could do are transition agreements for municipal services. A perfect example is our wastewater management. We do have options for providing municipal services, and we wish to eventually transition that to either a specific municipality or a regional authority. We can start to look at that in some of these ILAs, but we just need an idea of what your wish list is and what you're kind of definitely against. So we can start to,
Right now,
yeah, just
I mean,
that was
maybe you could pose that to us so we can think about it and get back to you about what, I I need to.
I know we're using our time. We will do that, get something back. It's not urgent, but it's important. The
No, I think
faster
it's
we
very
move it,
important.
It's good.
And it can certainly be on the next Monday strategic planning meeting that we do. We can make sure that we have you guys come back and have that.
that works too.
And just kind of closing then, one of the things we want to be able to do with you is have this kind of discussion at least quarterly, if not more often, especially upfront. And so we're working with Scott to figure out where the calendar might look on dates where you're not quite so pressed for time, and we can set aside an hour or 90 minutes to really get down and talk about these issues. And some of those might be a joint meeting with the planning commission.
When you talk about development regulations, I don't care whether it's the cities or the counties, I want the most aggressive and stuff. And what we know today is the most aggressive development regulations are the counties, not the cities.
Correct.
We're just backwards.
What do you define as aggressive?
Allow more development in a concentrated area.
Oh,
Right now, you can do that more in the county than you can in the city, even with their infill development regulations. There are certain uses they still don't allow, we've been allowing for years.
Thank you, commissioners. We'll be back.
Thank you very much, appreciate it. Okay, so we are gonna continue on because we have an executive session that needs to start at 10:45. So, So we'll go to, Scott is gonna give us a update here on the abatement, I can never say opioid abatement council, I don't know why that is so hard. for me to
Regional
read.
OAC, yes.
So we will start that discussion and then we will have a hard stop at 10:45.
Get the slides, thanks, Ron. So commissioners, I wanted to do a refresh with you from a conversation we had a couple months ago on our requirements around a Spokane Regional Opioid Abatement Council. So if you go to the next slide, this is something you've seen before. We've refined it a little bit to add some more context to some of the obligations. So as a reminder, under the One Washington MOU, a lot of jurisdictions are receiving direct allocations from that agreement that was negotiated through a outside council, and it was the allocation started in August of 2022. The agreement did, and it calls for participating local governments, of which Spokane County is one of them, to form a regional opioid abatement council under the terms of the agreement. And it says, prior to distributing any of the opioid funds, that means the local jurisdictions, distributing them locally, we must establish an OAC, and it has some specific duties and responsibilities that I'll get into in a minute here. Another thing I wanted to call out is it does require that the funds, 10% of the funds that are received by each region, which is defined in the One Washington MOU, will be set aside and reserved for actual administrative costs that the OAC may incur. And this is another point of emphasis. Participating local governments that receive a direct payment, which Spokane County, and we have 10 in our region that I'll share with you here in a minute, maintain full discretion over the use and distribution of their allocation of the funds. So this board gets to decide how those are used. We go to the next slide.
Just gonna double check, it was Justin Johnson.
I don't know, he might be, I don't know if he's in the audience. Is Justin in the audience? No. I think he has some commitments.
Okay, thank you.
So this is again straight out of the One Washington MOU. The OAC for each of the regions shall be comprised of representation from the participating counties and the participating cities within the region. And then the method of selecting those members is determined by each of the local participating governments in the region, and they must have specific work or education experience pertaining to one of the approved uses that are laid out in the One Washington MOU. So go to the next slide. This is just a reminder of who is in. So our Spokane region, it says Spokane region in the One Washington MOU. It is comprised of 6 counties, Adams Ferry, Lincoln, Pend Oreille, Stevens, Spokane. And then within Spokane County, there are 4 cities that receive direct allocations: Cheney, Liberty Lake, Spokane Valley, City of Spokane. So there's 10 of us who need to comprise this, of the regional OAC. Those just show the percentage of the payouts of the total dollars that were negotiated for the outside council. You can see City of Spokane and Spokane County represent the largest percentage of the overall dollars. Stevens County is next closest dollars that can be allocated. Okay, so if we go to the next one, this is the duties of the regional OAC. This is an oversight body. They are a reporting body. They see the funds that are coming into the region. They oversee, they get reports back from the jurisdictions on how the funds are being utilized. They're reporting those in a publicly facing dashboard to the community to see how the funds are being spent, where they're going, and then they're also providing the annual report on an annual basis for the public. So dashboard, aggregation of information, of data, not decision points on how it's being spent. The final piece is they hear complaints. They're kind of a hearing body, if you will. If there are questions as to whether the funds were used for approved purposes, and to make sure that there's compliance with reporting requirements by the local jurisdiction. So umbrella organization doesn't make decisions on how the dollars get spent, all right? So the next slide is what the duties of each of the local participating governments that receive the dollars. And I'll summarize this in a the BOCC, the Spokane County, is responsible for determining priorities, getting public input on establishing those priorities, doing the RFPs based on the priorities, contract administration, funds distribution, and we receive the funds from the trustee that come to us for the approved uses. So all the decisions on the use of the OAC funds rest with Spokane County Board of County Commissioners for the dollars received by Spokane County. They rest with the city of Spokane for their funds, rest with Spokane Valley, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So their decisions don't impact our decisions, essentially, independent decision making on it. Okay, so back in May, we had initiated, because of our local participating jurisdictions, no one entity had really moved forward yet with saying, hey, we need to get this thing set up. We had not loosely heard, but strongly heard from the outside council. They were really targeting us to have it set up by June 1. June 1 has come and gone. So at that time, back in May, we reviewed a letter with the Board of County Commissioners here to send out to all the participating jurisdictions to try to initiate the process. Say, hey, we're aware of this. We need to get one set up. Can you please provide us your contact person who we can communicate with and have the conversations to advance this thing forward? We also indicated we'd be happy to work on a draft MOU, ILA that would lay out what the regional OAC is, how it's comprised, that sort of thing. We had utilized a document that North Sound Regional OAC had set up between their participating jurisdictions. So our intention was to basically emulate the same thing for sake of ease. We've received back information from Stevens County, City of Spokane. We've been in contact with City of Spokane Valley, and I believe Pend Oreille. We have not, to my knowledge, received anything back from their jurisdictions yet. We're at a point now where I think it's time for us to send out this MOU to try to continue to catalyze that conversation and get us closer to it. We had a productive meeting with the City of Spokane last week. I think we walked out of there with same common understandings of the need to set up the regional OAC. So what we're trying to do right now is just get that OAC established, and then the board has a series of things which will need to take place for identifying priorities, getting the community input, and then guiding our team to be able to start putting these dollars to work in our community. So attached to some of your draft documents today is that MOU. Some of the things that I want to just call out in there, the agreement does not contemplate a joint budget. The agreement does not constitute a joint agreement or claim by the local participating governments of any of the funding that's not otherwise specified in the agreement. It's really just laying out the duties that are in the One Washington MOU for the regional OAC, and it also calls out a board composition. In here, what we've got right now for your consideration is just a simple, straightforward, one representative on the board for each of the participating jurisdictions. So 10 total and one from each, so 4 from cities, 6 from counties. Again, they don't make decisions on priorities. They don't make decisions on how the funds would be spent. We talked about some ideas in the last one about maybe looking at the model that SRTC set up, which could have a trigger clause if some action came forward that did some proportionate uses or some proportionate weighted voting of it. But again, this body is not making decisions on the use of the funds or the prioritization of the funds or how they get deployed. So for simplicity's sake, we're recommending that we just keep this as a one representative for each of the counties and one for each of the cities. So I'll stop.
Commissioner Jordan, I see you raise your hand.
Yeah, just real quick, I was going to ask Scott to kind of recap the conversation that we had with the city about the different options for board structure and kind of why folks seem to have a consensus that it might be best to just go with the simplest, given that it's not a decision-making body. But if that's the case, I just wanted to point out on page 23 of our packet. I don't know that the draft agreement reflects that, because it does say that the OAC shall be composed of one representative of each participating county and one representative of each participating city. Then it says the participating cities within each county shall choose one individual to represent all of the cities within that county. So I don't know if that's just out of date language, but wanted to point that out.
Yes, thank you. I noticed that this morning while reviewing it, that last sentence should be stricken. It was, I had stricken it initially when I had updated the draft last week, but it got lost. So only the first sentence should hold, the second sentence should come out. And with our conversation with the city, the best, from my recollection, I think the simplicity was also the preferred route based on what Commissioner Jordan just said, because they don't have decision-making authority. It would probably lend to our easiest path forward of getting this agreement set up and going. If we go into a more of a complicated weighted voting thing, it could delay our ability to get common agreement with them. So I think they were also comfortable that since the decision-making would remain with the local jurisdictions, they would be comfortable with a single individual who would be assigned to it. And also noting that they have to have basically that experience to be able to be on the board.
Commissioner Kearns, and then I'll go back to Commissioner Jordan.
So what do you envision your standard meeting looking like with these representatives? If it's a non-decision-making body, I know it says that it's that body's duty to sort of make sure funds are spent correctly, but if one jurisdiction decides to spend their money a certain way and this body's, we don't think that's an appropriate way, do they have the ability to block them from spending the money that way? I mean, or is this more of just a body that'll get together with 10 people and just say, this is how our jurisdiction is spending the money, this is how that jurisdiction is it more just information sharing then?
I think it's more regional, Commissioner. I think it's more of taking all the information from all the 10 participating jurisdictions, aggregating it up, demonstrating how they're being spent, what the uses are going for, doing the checkbox that it meets one of the approved uses. They're not, I don't see them necessarily representing their jurisdiction, they're representing the regional OAC as an oversight.
Yeah, and summarizing the ticket, because they have to report to the group, so
Yeah.
Commissioner Jordan, you may have other thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, I just want to speak to that a little bit. I've been involved in several meetings with the city, and I think what made this one a lot more productive, I think, is that we actually had representatives of the administration and city council in the room, which was good to just have everybody present to be able to really talk it through. And this was the makeup of the board was something I asked about, because I know that Commissioner Waldrop and French had mentioned the voting structure for SRTC, which has that weighted vote by size. So we did talk about several options in that meeting. And I think it's fair to say that all of representatives of the city said that they are often very concerned about weighted representation on some of these bodies, so that, you know, they are fairly represented. But there was a very low level of concern from the city about that in this context, given that this body does not really have the authority, as it's contemplated under the agreement, to dictate funding or commit us to certain funding decisions. And that, I just wanted to point out, is different than a board like Martin Hall, which I know Commissioner French is aware of, which does have the ability to raise rates and commit decision-making under the county budget. So it was a very low level of concern from the city about them only having one voting member of this particular board.
So, and I think as we've learned more about the purpose of this board as advisory, and basically the only thing that this group would do is if the jurisdiction chose to spend the money outside of the agreement guidelines, the settlement agreement, Washington State opioid guidelines, then they would maybe say something. But other than that, you still have total control over how you want to spend the dollars. Each jurisdiction does.
Correct. Based on the approved purposes set forth in the One Washington MOU.
So that gives me less concern about like the weighted, because it's really not voting on, it just depends on how you set up the group. Are they gonna be giving a list of priorities? Are they gonna be giving advice around, here are the gaps in our community where we could best, leverage these funds? So anyway, but my question was, so the membership with an individual from every, that's appointed, so it's an individual that's appointed from every jurisdiction. And the idea is those individuals would have some sort of expertise in treatment, prevention, services, outreach. So it's not like there's elected officials on this group.
Wouldn't
These are-
envision there would be unless one of the electeds had that
They-
experience.
well,
Yes.
And they might.
Yeah.
So you could put anyone you wanted on the board, or would we have to create parameters around the types of individuals that each jurisdiction could appoint?
They have to have work experience in one of the approved uses that you just mentioned there. So
There's like 5.
there are parameters in place right now, but they're fairly wide in terms of where they could fit into a category.
Okay.
And yes.
They don't have to live in Stevens County. They don't have to,
Well, Stevens County will appoint somebody from Stevens County.
okay. I mean, that's a requirement too?
There's nothing in here, and even back
I
to
would
here.
think that they would, but
Yes.
like if they had let's say they have a treatment facility in Stevens County, but the person who manages it lives in Spokane County. I mean, they could choose to put whoever they wanted on the.
So my understanding is there's nothing in the One Washington MOU that would exclude that from happening. Even back on the hearing complaints, there's nothing that says, well, here's the action that will result from that, other than just they'll hear complaints.
Okay.
Yes.
I was gonna make some lawyer joke, but I won't, because
No, go
Commissioner
for it.
French is
No.
better at those. Some of these lawyers, this just seems like a strange, why hear
Watch it.
complaints?
Watch
and
it.
There's no, I don't know. So the idea is that you can hear a complaint, but then nothing happens.
Yeah.
It just
That's
gets,
okay.
it just gets reported up.
Yep.
Okay,
Just
all
doesn't
right.
seem to have any teeth to it.
All right, well,
So unless there's
anyway,
other-
I just wanna thank you guys for getting the band back together, and hopefully we're all moving in the same direction.
Yeah.
Cause I think there was some confusion by the city about like forming their own council. It's like, well, you only really need one council, and you can spend the dollars as you see fit in your community.
That was the linchpin that I think we finally
There
got
was
to
kind of a
and
misunderstanding of
yeah,
that. Okay,
resolved.
all right.
Do we know dollar amounts yet?
We know dollar amounts that we've received, and we know dollar amounts what we expect to receive maybe next year, but they're all sliding scale, and we haven't finished. I think there's one more settlement that hasn't been finalized yet with one of the pharmaceutical companies themselves. So, and even then, no one's given us a schedule out. Some of them are 12 years, some of them are 17 years, and no one's given us a schedule out to know what those dollars will be.
So, Commissioner Jordan, last question, and then we.
Yes. Sounds like the city will need to go back and have its own conversation, but the folks in the room were seeming to come to consensus. And it sounds like they may keep some kind of advisory body of experts, right, to advise them on the spending priorities and what those gaps and needs are that may be separate from the regional OAC. So I do think that's another area where, as Scott indicated, we'll need to continue having our own conversations about how do we want to gather community input and expert input to shape these priorities.
And that may be a good utilization of the OAC, that the board may say, hey, you're experts in this area, can you give us some recommendations where we might want to deploy some dollars out? So just two other quick call outs. The regional OAC is anticipated to be existing within our community services team under Justin Johnson. He's got great experience in here. He's been actively involved with these conversations. And then once the prioritization is set, the actual administration of the funds for the county would sit with Justin as well. So they'll kind of be there, you'll have the regional OAC there, and then some staff that are actually doing the contract administration, RFP issuance, all that sort of stuff.
And it's being modeled partly with the BHASO, because that's a regional body anyway, and so like the Shrills meetings, you know, it's those regional groups getting together, so that's why having it sit there makes a lot of sense. You know, they already know all the players and all of that.
So our next steps is we will get this draft MOU circulated back out to the other 9 jurisdictions and actively work on trying to get some agreement and action signing on them.
Make sure that one says it's complete.
And this one is complete, yes.
Yes.
Already
Okay.
sent it out back to the team. Okay, that's all I had.
Okay, any other? Okay, great. Thank you. So that's gonna take us to, I believe we have an executive session.
We do. We've got one executive session item, and that is to review evaluate the qualifications of an applicant for public employment under RCW 4230 110(1)G. In that meeting will be the commissioners, all 5 commissioners, Ashley, Cameron, and myself.
Do we have to, if we go into executive session, have you there?
Only for pending potential litigation.
So unless the commissioners want it, we could want Chris Anderson to join, we could excuse him and let him do some other information. Get rid of him.
I would say,
Absolutely
I
good
would
with
keep
that.
them, but that's,
That was fine. Whatever you'd like.
I
Whatever
mean-
you'd like on this one is perfect.
I'd be willing to keep you.
Just in case, why not?
And then no action is anticipated, and I'm just checking on our time.
Until noon.
We'll have,
I believe we have a hard stop at noon.
at noon, so an hour and 15 minutes.
So, okay, so an hour and 15 minutes. We have Ashley and Chris. Great, there are only 2 extras of the.
Yep, I looked myself, 5 commissioners.
Okay. So we're gonna go into executive session. It's now 10:46. We will be in executive session until noon. Do we anticipate action? Not at this point in time. No action anticipated this time. For all the reasons Scott stated, with the people that Scott stated. So we will then adjourn. We don't have anything else today. Okay, and then
I knew you were working on
at noon, we'll be
something.
adjourning for today. And then we'll come back to our meeting